All right, hi everybody. Welcome to Networking with Mixed Compute. So this is basically a bit of a tutorial on how to set up an environment using VMs, Baremetals, and containers all networked together, and that's all orchestrated through OpenStack. So let's start with the Baremetal problem. So Baremetals provide some interesting challenges when trying to set up a mixed compute environment. So let's dive into that. So VMs and containers, you have a foothold within the machines that those run on. You either have control over the hypervisor or the container orchestration engine. However, with Baremetals, once you've handed those over to the tenant, you no longer have any control of what goes on inside that machine. So your only point of control is really at the top of rack switch. And that's why in bare metal environments, you need to have hardware networking. So taking a step back, let's look at what we're trying to achieve. So we have this topology where we have some OpenStack services running on the controller. Then we have a bunch of VMs running on Nova. We have Docker running some containers, and we have some bare metal servers. So how does OpenStack help us connect all of these things? So there's really 4 projects in OpenStack that we're going to utilize to do this. So we have Kuryr to handle the containers, Nova for the VMs, Ironic for the Baremetals, and they're each going to make port create calls to Neutron in order to connect each of these computes to a Neutron network. So they're calling Neutron APIs. Neutron, under the hood, is then going to call vendor ML2 drivers to connect each of these services to the aforementioned hardware. So how do we do this? Let's start with Neutron. So we have the ML2 config file, and what we're going to do is we're going to configure our desired network. I'm just going to go with a simple VLAN network for this session, and then we're going to have to configure our mechanism drivers to do both the the hypervisor networking as well as the vendor plugin driver or mechanism driver to handle the hardware networking. So the first thing we're going to do after we finish the config is we're going to create a network and a subnet for that network. So everything's going to end up on VLAN 16 in this case. And we don't need to do anything special for VMs here, so we can just go ahead and boot one. And so under the hood, this is going to go and call port create to Neutron to connect that VM to the Neutron network. So now we can move on to the bare metal piece through Ironic. So in the Ironic config file, we're going to need to let Ironic know that we want to do our networking through Neutron. That's that enabled / default network interface config there. Then we're going to want to go and give Ironic Neutron credentials so that it can go and create Neutron ports. And then we're going to want to go and configure a cleaning and provisioning network. So this is where Ironic does all of its work when it's not yet handed the server over to the tenant. So it can go and load the images there, and it can also go and erase the hard drive once the tenant's done with that compute. So now that we've got the config done, we can go and we can create the bare metal node in Ironic. So first we create the node, and then we create Ironic's view of the physical network, which is basically this list of switch to bare metal server connections. So you'll create multiple of these if you've got multiple interfaces connected to the bare metal server. And so this goes back to the piece that I was mentioning before, where we have no control of what's going on the bare metal server, whereas for containers and VMs, we would just run a discovery protocol on that server to figure out where in the network it was located. With Ironic, we can't do that, so we need to explicitly enroll that in Ironic. So now we're ready to boot that Ironic or bare metal server. So we can go ahead and do that. And again, it's going to create a Neutron port to connect that bare metal server to the Neutron network. So now we're done with bare metals and VMs. We can move on to the container piece through Kuryr. So again, it needs some Neutron API credentials. We load those in there. We point it to some bindings, in this case, the Docker Kuryr bindings, so that we can connect the Docker network to a Neutron network. So we're going to create the Docker network there based on an existing Neutron network. We see that -o neutron.net-name. So that's the Neutron network we created way back in the Neutron config piece. And then we're going to go and we're going to launch the container on that network. And so you might be wondering, well, you didn't do any OpenStack APIs for that container piece. So actually, under the hood, what happened is the Kuryr agent went and created a Neutron port for us that connected that container to the Neutron network. So at this point, we have a VM, a bare metal, and a container all sitting on the same Neutron network and also physically connected in the hardware. And we're ready to have a mixed compute environment. That's it. Thanks for coming. Any questions?